Thank you all so much for being here. I know it's the first not rainy day and sort of mild, so it's really nice of you to take a couple of hours of your time to be here with us. You know our names. We're here to talk to you today about this journey that we took. And it was along the Civil Rights Trail down south. We did travel with a travel company. It was Trafalgar, with a group of about 18 very diverse people, culturally, ethnically, age-wise. So that was really very exciting. We would not call this a vacation. It was disturbing. It was inspiring. It was a whole host of feelings and emotions that you could feel traveling this journey. Not a vacation, but we knew that going in. It was an educational experience, a real learning experience, life-altering, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, just an amazing experience. And though Karen and I both lived through the civil rights era, Karen a little less than me, we learned so many things that we really were never aware of. So that was eye-opening. Again, we were inspired. We were infuriated. We were humbled by this journey, and we came home feeling we had to share it. And so this is our third presentation. Our first one was at the East Lyme Library. Our second one was at that big church in Mystic, and I never remember the name, but up on the hill. Thank you, that one. Union Baptist. And this is our third, with an invitation for Waterford as well. So we're very excited about this. I was a teacher my whole career. I'm comfortable. Karen, I give her so much credit because she's doing this out of really the passion that we derive from this trip. This is not her go-to comfort zone. So appreciating that. So we'll get started. Thanks for being here.
Okay, we're going to start with the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum and the Museum of Mississippi. This was a facility that opened in 2017. It took $20 million to do this. There's two museums there. They share auditoriums, classrooms, and storage space, but they are very separate entities. We were able to get to the Civil Rights Museum, and it's just an amazing place. They truly, unabashedly display what Mississippi was in the Civil Rights era. And it goes from 1945 to 1976. And it covers a lot of it has to do with Medgar Evers. He was a very prominent civil rights advocate in the 50s, and he was gunned down in his driveway in Jackson, Mississippi, and this is where this is. And Emmett Till, because Emmett Till was killed in Mississippi. We'll get to Emmett Till in a few minutes. But it is a great place. There's 8 galleries in the Civil Rights Museum, and it comes around a circle. And they play the song, The Little Light of Mine, the entire time, because that was the theme song of Mississippi civil rights, as well as the Civil Rights Movement. One of the great things about this museum is that we were able to meet Hezekiah Watkins. Now, Hezekiah Watkins is the one in the middle. He was the youngest freedom rider. He was 13, and he was watching the Birmingham, things that were going on in Birmingham, and the march and the Children's Crusade, and they were watching that. And he was very curious about what was going on. And he asked his elders, his mother, his aunts and uncles, his teachers, what was this all about? And no one would tell him. They just kind of poo-pooed it, ignored it, or said, "Oh, I don't know. There's just some people that are on the TV." So he got very curious, and so he got wind that the Freedom Riders were coming to Jackson, Mississippi, and so he and his friend, who lived next door, said, let's go down and see what's going on. So they told their mother that they were sick Sunday morning, and the last thing she said to him, "Don't leave this house." And of course he did, with his friend. So they go downtown, and by the time they get downtown to the Greyhound bus station, the Freedom Riders had pretty much been dispersed and had been arrested. So they were the two kids at 13. They were just fooling around. And this becomes important because they were just fooling around, and the neighbor, the friend, pushed him through the white door. And immediately he was grabbed by a policeman. And this is the question he asked him. And so this becomes very, very important. He said to him, "What's your name and where were you born?" And he said, "Well, I'm Hezekiah Watkins, and I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin." And immediately the policeman said, "We got another one here." And he was hauled off to jail because they felt that he was from the north, as the Freedom Riders were, coming down to do things, and to bring to the South civil rights and so forth. And so he was hauled off to jail into the Patchman jail, which is a notoriously horrible place. And he spent 5 days as a 13-year-old in jail. And when we actually met him, talked about this experience, and when we asked him, he said, "What was it like?" And he says, "I really don't like to think about it. I don't go there much." So how did he get out? President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, had to call the governor of Mississippi, and that's how they were freed. And so he got out of jail. 5 days. I'm sorry, 5 days.
13 years old.
13 years, 5 days. They were pretty much all, because again, this was nationalized, televised, so forth. So what happened to me when I was in the museum was that, as again I said, there were 8 galleries. You got to be able to sit in the middle and just rest, wait, whatever. And so I was sitting there really kind of contemplating what I had just learned, and this man who was in a wheelchair came over to me and started to talk. He was probably a little older, my age, but
more like my age.
Yeah.
More like my age.
And he was a white gentleman, and we got to talking, and he shared with me that at 18 years old, he was part of the white mob that followed the Freedom Riders into the jail and were jeering them and were protesting and, all sorts of things that they were saying, ugly things that they said to him. And now, 58 years later, he considers Hezekiah Watkins one of his best friends. So things can change. Things can go do it. They're both docents at the museum. And so it was very special to talk to a living legend, and that's what we got to do.
So you heard Karen say, we met him. That was one of the most awesome things on this journey, was we met these people in their 70s or older who had actually lived through this in the South. How much longer are they going to be around? So it was just an incredible experience. So just want to preface a little bit, because you're going to hear us tell some history. However, we're not here to give a history lesson. We're really here to sort of make sure this all makes sense to you. But again, it's really how this impacted us and our lives and what we learned. So recognize this young person? I think we all do, Emmett Till. One of the many powerful places we visited was the courthouse, where the 2 men who brutally, and I mean brutally, and I'll go into a little bit of detail, murdered this 14-year-old boy. We were in that courthouse where these two men were acquitted by an all-white, all-male jury in less than an hour. It was a beautiful courthouse. Mahogany wood or whatever the wood was, but very beautiful, very well kept, and empty and quiet. And we sat in the jury box. We sat in the seats that jury sat in. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Till. I highly recommend it if you haven't, although it's hard to watch. Very hard to watch. And it wasn't out in the theaters very long because people don't want to revisit these things. Yeah, and it is uncomfortable. But if you're so inclined, I think you can probably pull it up. Just to review the time historically, the summer of 1955. So, Emmett Till was a happy, gregarious, funny 14-year-old boy from Chicago. He had cousins in Mississippi. He was an only child, raised by a single mom. He desperately wanted to pay his cousins a visit. And his mom had a lot of trepidation, as you can imagine, about sending her only son down south where he really didn't know the culture and the everything that existed down there, right? But she relented, put him on the train, and sent her only child on his way. Once he got there, not really understanding the prejudice, the discrimination, the segregation for blacks in the Deep South, he entered Bryant's grocery store. Now, there are different stories about why. The one I have is that he went to get some candy. His cousins were with him, but they knew. Owned by two white, actually, a brother and his half-brother and the wife, Carolyn, which is pertinent. I'll tell you about her in a minute. Owned by them. So allegedly, the key word is allegedly, he whistled at Carolyn Bryant. His cousins completely freaked out. It's like, get in the car. Get in the car. What are you doing? So off they went to their dad's house, his uncle's home. They were waiting, wondering what was going to happen, and then a few days went by and dodged a bullet. Not really. In the middle of the night, 4 days later, Emmett was abducted by Roy Bryant, Carolyn's husband, and his half-brother, J.W. Millam. They proceeded to beat this 14-year-old boy with a gun, shoot him, and throw his body into the river with a heavy cotton gin fan attached with barbed wire. The brutality to his neck to weight him down. And the only concern they really had about the illegality of this was that they were going to be caught because they stole the fan. They were arrested a few days later, and there was overwhelming evidence. But again, as I said earlier, they were acquitted within an hour. And the jury member said it wouldn't have even taken that long had they not ordered out for pizza and soda. 6 months later, these two men were interviewed by what was then Look magazine. They told their story in detail and were the truth and were paid $4,000. Emmett's mother, imagine the heartbreak, the horror, had his body, she insisted that his body be flown back to Chicago. And she had an open casket, which I'm sure many of you have seen over the years, and the horrific photos, unrecognizable Emmett. Over 50,000 mourners filed past his unrecognizable body. And this was one of the turning points in the civil rights movement. And as Karen said, part of that had to do with media for all we have to say about media, good and bad, people could see this now, what was happening, what was going on. Both of these men, if you're curious or interested, ended up living very unremarkable lives. They both died of cancer. Obviously, I am going to be judgmental. Stupid. Their clientele for this little store were black folks. So that business failed, and any other business that they tried to start up. But in 2017, so Carolyn lived to the age of 80, maybe older, but at age 80, she recanted her testimony. How many years did it take? Admitting that Till never touched her, never threatened her, never harassed her, and in her own words, I'm going to quote, she said, "Nothing that boy did could ever justify what happened to him." As we sat in that courthouse, oddly, it was a truly solemn and spiritual experience. It was almost like that little boy was there saying, "I'm glad the truth is being told." Also, there was a community apology written by that township. What was it?
Money, Mississippi.
Money, thank you. Money, Mississippi. It was written in 2007, and we were asked as a group, I won't read it to you, but it was passed around, and each of us read a sentence or a paragraph that apologized for whatever it's worth. And I'll just read you one little section. "We, the citizens of Tallahatchie County, recognize that the Emmett Till case was a terrible miscarriage of justice. We state candidly and with deep regret the failure to effectively pursue justice." That's one piece of this apology. But to read that, there wasn't a dry eye among us. And just an amazing, horrific, eye-opening experience. Okay. So once again, in fact, when Karen and I were putting this together, I had pages and pages of what I wanted to share about the Jim Crow laws, and then Karen so wisely said to me, "Ann, remember, we're not doing a history lesson. We're sharing how this all impacted us and what we might have gleaned from it that we didn't know before." So I'm very, very briefly going to just talk a minute about the Jim Crow laws. Again, I'm sure that many of you or most of you know what this was all about. But to recap a little, Jim Crow laws were put into place after Reconstruction was abandoned. Reconstruction was a period of time after the Civil War where the federal government stepped up and knew that the slaves, the freed slaves, would not fare well had they been left to their own devices and would not have opportunities. So they were there, monitoring basically things for about 7 years. And then again, I'm not going to go into the details, you can look this up anywhere, but for political reasons, might ring a bell, for political reasons, it was like, we're pulling our troops out, enough of this. And so that's what happened. And almost immediately, the Jim Crow laws also came immediately following the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in the United States, but it was really a way to impose a system of white supremacy. There were loopholes, one of which we are not going to go into because it wasn't one of the places we really spent time at, was that people were not allowed to be slaves, people were not allowed to hold slaves unless somebody committed a crime and was arrested and then could be considered not a slave, but an indentured servant, which was exactly the same as slavery. Just horrific. So Jim Crow laws put into place to systematically deprive black citizens of their civil rights. Jim Crow laws eventually spread around the country in theaters, in restaurants, water fountains, all of this I know you're familiar with, pools, cemeteries, bus stations, train stations, on and on and on, places where blacks were forbidden to enter or had to enter through back doors or side doors, or for the theater, climb up to the balcony, no air conditioning, and all of this horrific stuff. And former Confederate soldiers were working as polices and judges. Guess what that meant? It was virtually impossible for black citizens to win any court case. These laws existed. We're talking about around 1865 when we started this, for about 100 years. From post-Civil War until 1968. I think the only person in this room, maybe two, that wasn't here in 1968 is my niece Anna, and perhaps that young lady in the back. Yeah. Oh, all right. So all of us have been around, I'm guessing, during that time. It's important to keep in mind as we look further into the civil rights movement. So, as a result of a Supreme Court ruling in 1896, in the case of Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, which reigned for almost 60 years, it was finally overturned with Brown versus the Board of Education. This graduation photo in 1963 gives reason for pause. And what we have here is segregation or integration. Look at the faces. Do we still have schools like this today? Yeah. In many of our neighboring towns, in fact. So, okay, Brown versus the Board of Education. Thank you. Okay, so on to the civil rights movement, where the philosophy of Gandhi's nonviolent movement in India was studied and emulated by Martin Luther King Jr. and activists who practiced his philosophy in every type of protest that went on during the civil rights movement. Incredible. Lots of people think, about so many of the things which we'll talk about, or you're knowledgeable about, that, oh, people just got mad and did this and that. No, they were trained, they were schooled, they did role plays, they did in this practice of nonviolence. And we've all seen the sit-ins and, getting hosed and all of the other things, and not one act of violence. Pretty amazing, pretty courageous.
And so this particular picture was one of his favorites, and this is actually in the ML.
Yeah, we have to speak into that.
This picture was actually in the MLK Center, which was located in Atlanta, where he is buried. Not Gandhi, MLK.
Right. Okay, so you notice that here we have student wing of the civil rights movement. I worked with youth my entire career. And anybody else who has had kids, has kids, whatever, we know the power, untapped power of youth. It's a beautiful thing. It really is. So Diane Nash was an exciting person to learn about. And she's largely been overlooked by historians, although some nice things happened towards the end of her life. She was a girl born in 1938, also Chicago, grew up in a very sheltered environment, went to Catholic school, and didn't really know too much about what was going on in the rest of the world. And it wasn't until she went to Howard University and then transferred to Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, that she came face to face with the brunt of the Jim Crow laws and their effect on black lives. So as a young college student, you know what age are college students? My niece is 22, almost 23. She's a college student. That was Diane Nash. She started the student wing of the civil rights movement. And she led the lunch counter sit-ins at age 22 years old. Pretty incredible. And in her words, she spoke of this time. At the time, segregation was humiliating. Just the reality of signs that said you couldn't use front doors or you couldn't use this water fountain implied that you were subhuman. Every time I complied with a sign, I felt like I was acquiescing to my own inhumanity. I felt outraged and I hated it. Diane was instrumental in the passage of the Civil Rights Act, passed in 1964 under John F. Kennedy Jr. And finally, in 2022, she was awarded by President Biden the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to Birmingham. And this is the Carlton Reese Memorial Choir at the Bethel Baptist Church. And it's actually located a little bit outside of Birmingham in Collegeville. We had the privilege of listening to this choir sing, and it was started by the Reverend Shuttlesworth. Sorry, he was a major leader in the civil rights movement, as well as an organizer of the Selma March to Montgomery. He changed the singing of hymns to freedom songs in 1959. That's how important this was to him and to the civil rights movement. So we got to listen to the choir, and as you can see, most of the people are over 70 in the choir. And after a couple of songs, one of them would get up, and they would tell us their experience in the Children's Crusade, which happened in Birmingham. So, and their stories were very powerful, and we listened to about 8 or 9 of them, the stories. They just got up and told us what happened to them. And every one of them, the theme was that every one of them, their parents were so against them going out of school and going into this children's march. And what they feared for their children, obviously. But they also felt the parents were afraid that they would lose their jobs. They were also afraid that their children would get arrested and have a record for the rest of their lives. And they also feared for extended family members like aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters. So it was really just more the much wider dynamic than participating in it. But they were great. They were just great, and they served us dinner, which was even better. Okay, it was very good. So now we're going to go on in Birmingham to the Children's March that happened. This was very, very powerful because, I saw it on the TV, but all of those pieces, really, I didn't put it all together. It really was a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King was against this, of using children to participate in this march. So what did segregation look like in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963? Well, first of all, you could ride the bus, but you had to ride it in the back. If you went downtown as a black person to buy a dress or a hat. A dress, as a black person, you were given a newspaper shell that you had to put on, and then you had to put the dress or whatever, the blouse that you wanted to buy, you had to put it over that. Same with the hat, particularly men hats, women's hats. They had, again, a newspaper shell, and that you had to put that on your head first, and then you could try on the new thing, the new item. So segregation obviously was in the soda fountains and the restaurants, and it was pretty bad. So Shuttlesworth and others came up with this idea of using the children. And one day, on May 2nd, thousands of children in the Birmingham school system, ages 7 to 18, left their classrooms and went down to the 16th Baptist Church, and from there they marched down to the downtown. They were met, because they were singing also, so they were loud. They were met with policemen and so forth, and they really were like attacked. So this is what happens to them. So this is in that park, which we'll talk about in a minute. That is a replica of the fire hoses that the fire department was ordered to use on these children. And this is a sculpture of the dogs. I remember the dogs. I also remember the hoses. But this was also what became so significant, is this was one of the first nationally televised civil rights movement demonstrations in the country that got a lot of press. So another thing we found out was who was in charge of this, making those decisions. This is our friend. This is Eugene Bull O'Connor, and he was the commissioner of public safety in Alabama at that time. They were elected positions, and he had been elected 8 times. He was a devout racist, and he felt that this was okay, and he ordered the hoses and the dogs and the police in riot gear to attack these children. They came day after day, and the second or third day they came in bathing suits. But the hoses really tore through their skin, and so that was not fun at all. They 8 days later, after this march, 8 days later, the business leaders and the town government, they decided, yes, we will desegregate all of the downtown businesses, and that we released every child from prison or jail. So what happened to him? There's a variety of things that happened to him, but we'll just go to the one that I can imagine. But the next election he lost, so he was never elected the public commissioner again. He did get some administrative position later on, but he also wore a pin for the rest of his life, which was about another 10 years, that said never, and it meant never desegregation. So Birmingham also has a nickname, and the nickname is Bombingham because there were nearly 50 unresolved murders done by the pretty much racially motivated bombings that have never been solved, and this was on the street. This was the sign on a street that we came across in the 40s into the 60s. So this is the 16th Street Baptist Church where the bombing of those 4 girls were done. 4 young girls. They were Denise McNair, she was 11. Addie Mae Collins, she was 14. Carol Robinson, she was 14. And Cynthia Wesley was 15. And this was a bombing done by the Ku Klux Klan. In retaliation, this happened in September, in retaliation for the march, the children's march that happened in And this is the Kelly Ingram Park, and this is where they memorialized those 4 children, and this is a lovely sculpture that is in the beginning of the park. This is also in the same park where the hoses are and where the dogs, the sculptures of the dogs. Okay. The park is named for, because you would think that with all that and all the publicity that happened that they might change the name of the park, but the Kelly Ingram Park, he was a firefighter from Birmingham that joined the Navy, and he was the first Navy person killed in World War I. So they've kept that name. Okay. Okay, this says, could you pass this test? This is an example of a literacy test. And as you can see, the print is really rather small, and it's even smaller when you actually see it. So you would need probably glasses to read this. But if not, okay. But there, as you can see, there are a lot of questions on there. There's 12 questions on that page. Well, that was one of 30 pages. You had to complete this test. It was 30 pages, and a person needed to complete the entire thing in 10 minutes, and there could be no mistakes. And if there were no mistakes after 10 minutes and you completed this all, you could then register to vote. And the questions aren't really all that hard, but you have to really know literacy. Like question 7 over there, you have to put a letter X above, you have to put above the X a cross. Okay, that's not real hard. Question 9 is draw a line through the last 2 letters of the alphabet. So you have to look at all the letters. Obviously you can see the Z, but you got to look for the Y over there. And so, I mean, it's time taking, and you have to read it carefully. And so that was what literacy in voting. So, okay, did everybody get a chance to do their guess at the jelly beans? Anybody?
Nope, no one.
Okay. Well, I really, really appreciate you all coming out today, but I hate to inform you that none of you are going to be able to register to vote. This was absolutely a literacy test of some sort, and because near the end of this literacy sort of thing, people were really criticizing it, and so some ingenious person came up with, well, farmers can count. We can count, they count cows, they count sheep, whatever, and so let us count the jelly beans. And so that was a criteria. If you could guess the right and exact number, you could register to vote.
Anna, what were some of the guesses? I'm just curious.
One was like 800, and then the closest was 323.
And the actual number?
331.
Sorry, you still didn't get it right.
Yeah, but you. Yeah. So, I mean, you would have gotten a jar of jelly beans, and probably we would have told you could register to vote too. But okay. Okay. Now this is the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Now we're going on to Selma. So we've left Birmingham. We're now on to Selma, and this is the infamous bridge, the March to Montgomery. And they were protesting voting rights, and that's what this was all about, because they couldn't register to vote in a sane manner. This is what they did. This was it was built in. It's a steel girder bridge. It was built in 1940. Okay, so you've got a nice shiny girder bridge, and you got to pick a name. Right? Got to pick a name for this thing. And so they got a blue ribbon committee together, and they could have called it goes over the Alabama River. They could have called it that. They could have called it the Selma Bridge, right? But they came up with this name. So who was Edmund Pettus? Well, he was a person that owned slaves. His family had profited very much from owning slaves, so he was very comfortable. He was a Confederate brigadier general. He was regarded as a Confederacy hero. He also believed in secession from the United States, which was not common in Alabama, and in particular his county at that time. Alabama wanted to stay in the United States, as a member of the United States, as long as they could have slaves. So he was sort of outside the box in that instance. He also believed very much in white supremacy. Historians have said that he felt that civilization could not exist without slaves. He served as a U.S. Senator for 1.5 terms. He did die in office. And the crown of the whole thing for me is that he was a Grand Wizard of the KKK. So you've got all these names that you could possibly, in 1940, and this was 33 years after he died, that they picked this guy. And so that's the name of this bridge. And so people have said to us, well, they've tried to change the name. Okay. There have been attempts. There is a split in the African American community about whether they should change the name, because there's historical context, and we should keep that name. There's a split. That's all I can say, that there's a split. So what did, so the name has not changed. In 2022, the Alabama State Senate said, well, let's change this name. Okay, well, let's not go too far. So what they decided, they passed a bill, 23-3, and it was under the Healing Amendment they wanted. And they said, well, we're going to keep that name where that is, and we're going to add Foot Soldier Bridge, but not to the top of that bridge. We're going to put a plaque down here. So it would be the Edmund Pettus Bridge - Foot Soldiers Bridge, but you're going to have to go down here and look down here. Luckily, and I mean that, luckily, that it was then at the Senate they had to pass it on to the state legislature. It was given 3 days before the end of the session, and they were not able to take it up. So it did not pass, and this bill did not come up in 2023. Half-hearted, in my opinion, but okay. So now Anne's going to talk about actually the march.
So this map actually shows where the march took place. And so as I mentioned earlier, when I spoke about Diane Nash, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had passed, but it had done little in some parts of the state of Alabama to ensure that African Americans had the basic right to vote. When a 26-year-old black demonstrator by the name of Jimmy Lee Jackson was clubbed and fatally shot while trying to protect his mother, who was being struck by the police for her participation in some demonstration, things really bubbled over. And in response, civil rights leaders planned to take their cause directly to Alabama's Governor George Wallace, familiar name to some of us, on a 54-mile walk from Selma to Montgomery. I knew about the bridge and the many attempts to cross it. I did not know that after they got across the bridge, they had 54 miles to walk. And these people were dressed in Sunday clothes. They didn't have Nike sneakers on. Another incredible act of courage and commitment. So the first attempt to cross the bridge at the onset of this was on a Sunday, March 7th. This later became known as Bloody Sunday. The march was led by John Lewis and a man whose name might not be as familiar, Hosea Williams. 600 people, as the 600 voting advocates peacefully started their trek. They had no weapons. Unarmed, in their finest Sunday clothes, they were ordered to disassemble under threat of violence. And as Lewis and Hosea stood their ground, the troops advanced with clubs, many of which, this is another horrific little fact we learned, were made from furniture legs, donated from the local furniture stores. And they attacked them with whips, rubber tubing wrapped in barbed wire. They used tear gas. And bystanders stood by and reveled and cheered. Lewis was struck down and badly injured and repeatedly hit, even though he was already badly injured. And although forced back, the protesters did not fight back. Finally, on March 21st, so 3 weeks later, the voting rights marchers crossed that bridge in Selma under protection again of federalized National Guard troops and arrived in Montgomery 4 days later. By then, the crowd had grown to 25,000 by the time they reached the Capitol steps. Well orchestrated. There were stops along the way for the marchers for food, water, lodging, all supplied by the churches and youth groups along the way, and predominantly organized by women. Just a little aside.
You want to talk about the park?
Yeah, I will. What made this march a turning point again, another turning point in the civil rights movement, again, it was captured on camera and televised. It was actually televised at the same time that the Nuremberg trial movie was being televised, so people were watching, and they interrupted that to show this. It transformed the local protest into a national civil rights event. The Voting Rights Act was signed into law on August 6, 1965 by President Lyndon B. Johnson. We walked across that bridge with great solemnity. Each of us lost in our own thoughts as we pondered the courage and tenacity of these people. At the end of the bridge was a small park with a dedication to John Lewis, which you see here.
So on several occasions, we would meet, tour directors would come on the bus of that particular area that we were going to. And this was Diane Harris of Selma, Alabama, and she came in and told us all about Selma, but she also told us her story of the march to Montgomery. She, again, was about 15. Her mother was adamantly opposed to her going, and she said to her, "Don't take your little brother." Okay. So the mother had to go to church. It was, and so she went out, and of course, she went down to the church where they were gathering, and she took her little brother. So the two of them, so they hatched a plan that they would stay in the back. They'd be a part of it, but they'd be at back of the march, so that they wouldn't be on TV or anything. But they were part of it. So as Ann said, when they got across the bridge, they were met by all of these state troopers and so forth. And so the marchers began to run towards them because they were at the end of the march, and started to run toward them, and they saw that there were police on horseback trying to disperse the crowd. So they started to run, And when they started to run, they found this on the way. They were going to go back to the church where they had started the march. And they found this older woman that was struggling, and so they helped her. But as they were helping her, they turned around and they saw the policeman on a horse gaining speed on them. And so she absolutely told them, go on, just go run. So they left her, and as they looked back, she was being beaten by this policeman on horseback. Next thing they knew, that the policeman was coming after them. And they ran as fast as they could, and they ran up the stairs into the church, and the horse followed them. They did make it, but you have to train a horse to climb stairs. She was great.
Okay, so this is a sign that was at that park. Just sort of an FYI kind of, again, acknowledgement of what really happened there and lynchings, giving some examples of that.
So now we're going to go on to Montgomery.
So this was another really emotional experience.
Capital of Alabama.
Sorry?
Montgomery is the capital of Alabama.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's where they marched to. I said that earlier, right?
Yeah.
To go up the state capitol to meet with Wallace about their rights. Okay, but one of the places we stopped in Montgomery, and the focus of the stop was the former slave market. So we entered this area, beautiful area, right along the Alabama River, really lovely, boats going along. It was, fairly newly renovated, and Karen and I walked down. We had some free time. We took a lovely walk. The weather was beautiful, people meandering, taking pictures and all of that stuff. And unbeknownst to us, which we later found out, was during the last 20 years of American slavery, from 1845 to 1865, no slave market was more central or more conspicuous than this one in Montgomery, Alabama. Between 1808 and 1860, the enslaved population of Alabama grew from less than 40,000 to more than 435,000. And Commerce Street was the center of operations for Montgomery's slave trade. So after this beautiful walk along the waterfront, scenic, peaceful, serene, we walked back up, reading the signs, reading the different things posted, and realized hundreds of enslaved people would arrive at this very spot every single day. By boat, by rail, nearby rail station. They were then paraded up Commerce Street and displayed at the central, it wasn't really a square, it was more like a round. Yeah, there you can see it, okay. Still there, but quite beautified. Flowers and all of that. So as we walked back along Commerce Street, we saw the buildings which warehoused, not housed, warehoused the slaves as they awaited sale. And though that town was full of wonderful restaurants, we really had trouble finding our appetite as we imagined the horrors that took place at that very spot.
Rosa.
So Rosa Parks, another familiar name. Most of us think we know the story of Rosa Parks. Maybe some of us do. And, of course, she's most known for the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama. Many stories depict her as a little lady who was just tired from a long day of work and didn't want to give up her seat when she was asked. But the truth about Rosa Parks is that she had been involved with the NAACP long before that time. She had been trained and studied the nonviolence Gandhi movement and nonviolence resistant methods. So her actions on that bus was the well-orchestrated kickoff for the 381-day bus boycott. The boycott was publicized, again, predominantly by women, with leaflets and flyers passed out throughout the city. They also handled the day-to-day planning for the protesters, including setting up carpools, I didn't know this, for women who just really couldn't make that walk or worked long distances from their homes. Of course, the bus company went crazy because over 80% of their riders were African Americans. They were losing money hand over fist. On December 20th, but still 381 days later, 1956, the Supreme Court upheld a lower court decision that stated it was unconstitutional to discriminate on public transit. Guts, determination, and sacrifice was what this was all about. Interesting fact, 12 years before this showdown that Rosa Parks had with the bus driver, she had had another encounter with possibly the same man on the same bus, and this might be an urban legend. And she couldn't get in the back door because it was so crowded. She was supposed to enter from the back door. So she tried to get in through the front door. And she was pushed and angrily told by this horrifically racist bus driver, "Get off the bus." She left quietly, but not before deliberately dropping her purse on her way out and sitting on a quote-unquote white seat as she picked it up. Passive resistance and spunk. I love that story. I hope it's true. More?
No. Okay, so now in Montgomery, this is the Legacy Museum, and I hope that people here have gone to it. By far, it was the best museum that we saw. The other ones were good, but this one, it was a terribly immersive experience. It really is so well done. It was started by Brian Stevenson, who wrote the book Just Mercies. There was also a film starring Michael D. Jordan and Jamie Foxx. And it's just so well done. It really is. And it was opened in April of 2018, so it's a fairly relatively new one. It's on a 6-acre site that was formerly an auction, slave auction site in Montgomery. And I'm going to just read you very quickly their mission. It's the nation's first memorial dedicated to the legacy of enslaved black people, people terrorized by lynching, African Americans humiliated by racial segregation and Jim Crow, and the people of color burdened with contemporary presumptions of guilt and police violence. There's so much to see in this one and so many things that you can do. It's just really very well worth doing, going to that. A part of this Legacy Museum is the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. And this also opened up in 2018. And as you can see, these are actually weathered steel columns. In the South, as you may know, they do everything by county. So these are the names of people that they could find that were lynched on each one of these slabs. There's 4,400 names, but on all these different slabs. So as you go in, as you can see that they're actually eye level as you go in, but as you continue with this museum, you go down, and as you go down, these things go higher, and so at the end of this exhibit, you actually are looking up as you would as a spectator to see the lynching. In the previous one, I said these are actually replicas of all of those steel columns. They're used in two ways. Many people have come to find their relatives' names, and so that you can easily see them here. And also, if a county has made sufficient, I guess they want to display them in their county as a form of redemption, they will actually ship them to the county for a period of time to be on an exhibit and a display. This particular slab had the most names that I found. Again, this was eye level. This is 26 names, and it was a county in Mississippi that were lynched that they could find. Okay, so lynching. So why were people lynched? Well, for a variety of reasons. This particular person, Charles Akins, he was 15. He was lynched and burned, and 1,000 people watched. This gentleman named Grant Cole, he was lynched after he refused to run an errand for a white woman. This was a construction worker that a white person had borrowed his shovel, and he refused to give it back to him, so they had him lynched. This Ella Persons, he was lynched by a white mob of 5,000 people in Memphis, Tennessee in 1917. We don't know what he did. This man, Marcel Ruffin, he was lynched in Garyville, Louisiana, and after he was accused of vagrancy, and he was homeless. This is one of my disturbing ones to me. A white man attempted to assault John Brownlee's daughter in Oxford, Alabama, in 1894, and Mr. Brownlee was lynched because he had the man arrested. This was another black man that was lynched in Millersburg, Ohio, for standing around in a white neighborhood. Okay. And this was a 14-year-old who was lynched in East Point, Georgia, for frightening a white girl. So those are just some examples, and there were many, many, many more plaques detailing why they were lynched.
So as we exited this profound place, we came upon, same grounds, but just sort of down the hill, this community reckoning area. And, you see the word atonement. And it brings hope, definitely brings hope. And so what we found along there were, you can change it, Karen, these basic apologies by counties from various southern states, Virginia, Florida, others. Similar probably, they're, again, hard to read, but acknowledging and apologizing for the horrific acts that happened for so long in the U.S. And again, moving, hopeful perhaps, but just, for me, the tip of the iceberg in terms of what really needs to be done wherever anybody's mind goes on that is a personal expression. And then, did you want to add anything, Karen, to that? Okay.
Well, this one just shows
Yeah, this shows one after the other, and they're hoping there'll be a lot more. It's fairly new. The museum is fairly new, but yeah. So you've heard a lot about Alabama, right? Which one? Oh, yeah, thank you. Okay, thanks, Karen. I need her, I told you. So after going through this, and I will just speak for myself, was definitely in tears. I mean, just my heart was aching and broken. And they had docents, or I don't know, they really weren't docents. They weren't saying anything, but they were people all around available to answer questions. And there was this beautiful young man, presented as a black man, standing there, and tears rolling down my face. And I went over to him, and I said, "Can I ask you a question? How do you do this? How do you come here day after day, perhaps, or as often as you do, and relive the horrific things that happened?" And his response was, "I feel privileged to do this because we get to tell our story. And that's the only way we're going to move forward." And he told me a little bit about his family. It was a beautiful conversation, but it was so moving. And one of the things we experienced with all these folks, whether they were the people in their 70s, or we never ever saw or heard anybody express rage, anger, and also, this was interesting to me because I've been on a lot of tours or trips. Normally you will never hear the word God or thank you, Jesus, or anything about faith, but every person who got up on the bus or wherever said something about their faith, and how their faith, whatever religion it might have been, or no religion at all, helped them through this and helped them to not live their lives with these horrible feelings that I know lots of us have that didn't live through it, which would just eat them alive. So it was a really very, very moving experience, and again, eye-opening. So, as I said, you heard a lot about Alabama. This is welcome to Alabama. Home sweet, what is it? Sweet home Alabama. Not. I just found that, oh my gosh, really? Where are you living? What are you? And you can argue with me. Maybe some of you are from Alabama. I don't know. So, okay.
So now we're going to go back to Memphis. This is the Lorraine Motel, and this is where Martin Luther King was gunned down. And this is what it looks like today. That is above the reef is the room. That was his room, and he was standing right there. And those cars are also still there. They were donated to him when any time he came to a town in the South. The local funeral directors would lend him their cars. And so this was the cars from the local funeral home. And the big thing about this one is that they can't, as you can see, that they're white wall tires, and they can't keep them. Those are fake because people come and steal them for years. And so they finally said, well, we have to make them look fake. Or they are fake, but so. And this is the window where James Earl Ray shot MLK. And it is very close. So next to the Lorraine Hotel is the National Civil Rights Museum. That is another excellent museum. It's located in Memphis, and it's built around the Lorraine Motel, and it's well worth to go see.
So again, another recognizable photo. Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral procession. So our last stop on our journey was in Atlanta. And this is where Martin Luther King Jr. was born. This is where he practiced or preached He was a pastor at the Ebenezer Baptist Church following his father, who was there before him. And this is where he and his wife are buried. And I'm sorry we don't have photos of this, because it really was a beautiful, beautiful, an eternal pool and gorgeous tombstones in their honor. But also, there was a National Historic Park and Memorial Center that Coretta Scott King, his wife, established very shortly after he died, after he was murdered. And it's a center highlighting, again, social change in nonviolent ways. So as you meander through the park, in a small museum, not a huge museum, but as you meander along the grounds there are all kinds of plaques and statements from Gandhi and the whole nonviolent resistance, peaceful resistance movement. They were hard to photograph, so do you have the other one first, Karen? So I tried to get this because it was very meaningful to me. And you may have heard that expression that Martin Luther King used over and over again in many of his speeches, beloved community. And all of us belong to communities. Groton is one of my beloved communities, not because I did live here for many years, but because I did all my teaching mostly in Groton. And any community I've lived in is beloved because of the meaning we bring to it in whatever way. So, again, hard to read, so I'm going to read it to you. But this was along one whole side of this park or place. The beloved community, and I'm going to accent certain words, is a realistic vision of an achievable society. One in which problems and conflicts exist, but are resolved peacefully and without bitterness. In the beloved community, caring and compassion drive political policies that support the worldwide elimination of poverty and hunger and all forms of bigotry and violence. The beloved community is a state of heart and mind, a spirit of hope and goodwill that transcends all boundaries and barriers and embraces all creation. At its core, the beloved community is an engine of reconciliation. This way of living seems a long way from the kind of world we have now, but I do believe it is a goal that can be accomplished through courage and determination, and through education and training, if enough people are willing to make the necessary commitment. This is such a reflection of the civil rights movement. You heard me use these words: courage, commitment, determination. And Martin Luther King Jr. and his followers believed this was possible. So this was, again, one of those places that was just spiritual, moving, emotional, beautiful. And so, yeah. Spiritual. Where is that? Yeah, so one last. Also, Coretta Scott King said, people who think nonviolence is easy don't realize that it's a spiritual discipline that requires a great deal of strength, growth, and purging of self so that one can overcome almost any obstacle for the good of all without being concerned about one's own welfare. Coretta Scott King. Lofty goals, certainly. So this is the end of our presentation, and just a couple of final remarks. On the last night of our journey, and if you've ever been on a trip or a tour, usually what they do is they gather everybody together and you have a dinner, and then, you either do some reflection or, whatever. So the man who was running this trip, his name was Leon. He was a black man from Los Angeles, actually, who, again, was around 70 years old. And he went around, asked us if we felt comfortable to share. What do you feel you got out of this journey? And now what? So everybody talked. Many people, there were some people who actually stayed back in the hotel on certain days because they just couldn't do it again. They just couldn't bombard their souls with all of this. But everybody got to speak. And then one person said, "But what do we do with this now?" And so Karen and I looked at each other and said, and again, I give her utmost credit because I'm used to getting up in front of people. She's not. And we said, we have to tell our friends, our neighbors, our communities, we have to talk about this. We have to share this for anybody who's willing and wanting to listen. So that's why we're doing this. If anybody knows of churches or other places, I'm saying this, Karen, and we're happy to entertain the thoughts of going elsewhere. But one of the people on our trip was a 90-year-old woman, black woman, who you would have thought she was 70. She was spry. She had a gorgeous singing voice. Her name was Olympia. She was traveling with her daughter, who was a lot younger, obviously. And she was from Virginia and actually had known Martin Luther King Jr. because her husband was a minister. And she left this message with us. She said, the greatest gift black Americans gave to America was the gift of forgiveness. So I thank you, we thank you for being here. If you have any questions, we're happy now to take questions. If not, we hope you enjoy your afternoon.